You probably don't think about microplastics when you're sitting down to dinner, but they could be in your food, and that's not necessarily a good thing. Microplastics are tiny pieces of plastic that are less than half a millimeter across. We know these particles end up in the ocean where fish eat them. But how do they get into our bodies, and what does it mean for our health? Let's dig into the science. When we think of plastic, we usually picture big things like water bottles and bags. But plastic is in a lot of other common products too, like straws, clothing, and even glitter. These things break down over time and release particles smaller than the width of a human hair called microplastics. While some of these particles come from larger plastic items breaking down, others are manufactured on purpose. Things like microbeads used in cosmetics or plastic pellets used to make larger plastic items all start out as microplastics. Microplastics end up in our environment in a few different ways. First, people discard plastic items that eventually end up in landfills or the ocean. The sun's UV rays and wind and waves break down the plastic over decades, turning them into particles smaller and smaller. And since most plastics aren't biodegradable, those particles stick around in the environment for a really long time. Second, as plastic ages, it starts to crack and flakes off, releasing particles into the environment. Third, synthetic textiles like polyester are made of polymers with weak bonds between the molecules. So just the friction of moving around can cause particles to break off into the air around us. And fourth, during manufacturing, plastic can be shredded into small pieces to make things like artificial turf or plastic lumber. This process creates a lot of microplastics as a byproduct. These particles are so tiny that they're almost impossible to get rid of. They can travel far beyond where the plastic was originally discarded. Once in the environment, microplastics can sit in soil and water for a really long time. They can also bind to organic matter or other particles, making them even harder to get rid of. And guess what? We have found ways to filter them out of things like tap water, but the particles are so tiny that it's hard to find a material that will block them. Right now, the best filters can remove about 90% of microplastics from drinking water, but the rest of the 10% adds up. Every year, people worldwide use about 275 trillion plastic-coated metal and plastic straws. Each one of those could be releasing particles into the water we drink or the food we eat. Now let's talk about how microplastics get inside our bodies. Fish, along with other sea life like oysters and mussels, eat microplastics that float around in the ocean. When we eat those fish, we're also eating those particles. Microplastics have been found in more than 600 species of fish sold in California and around the world. They've also been found in the salt we put on our food. Saltwater fish tend to eat more microplastics than freshwater fish, probably because there are more particles in seawater than freshwater. How much plastic we eat depends on the type of fish and how large it is. Small fish near the top of the ocean food chain eat lots of plankton, which often has particles of plastic floating around in it. As a result, these fish end up with higher levels of microplastics than larger fish lower on the food chain. On average, we eat about 12,000 metric tons of fish every year, and that could include quite a bit of microplastics. Now, while this might sound scary, we don't actually know the risks of eating that much plastic yet. Research is ongoing, but scientists have found that microplastics may contribute to inflammation in the body. That's a problem because chronic or long-term inflammation is linked to many diseases like diabetes, cancer, and heart disease. For example, in one study, mice fed a diet containing polystyrene microplastics developed signs of liver inflammation, and their livers had to work harder to process fats. Another study showed that mice fed microplastics had higher levels of inflammatory chemicals in their blood and more damage to their gut lining. A third study found that exposing human cells to plastic particles caused inflammation in the brain. While more research is needed, these studies suggest that eating microplastics might not be great for us, especially in the long term. We also know that at least some microplastics can move from the gut into other parts of the body. including the liver and intestines. And when they're in those organs, they can make it harder for them to do their jobs. Microplastics don't just make their way into our bodies through the food we eat. We can also breathe them in or absorb them through our skin. Most plastic particles are too heavy to float around in the air like smoke, but fibers made from polypropylene and polyester are light enough to become airborne. Fragrances, cosmetics, and personal care products often contain fibers or particles made of these materials. When we use them, we release fibers into the air around us that we then breathe in. Studies have found plastic fibers in the air of homes with synthetic textiles and in office buildings where people wear synthetic clothing. What's more, people living close to highways or factories that make plastic products breathe in more plastic fibers than those living farther away. And it's not just fibers. Plastic particles can be released into the air when clothes made from synthetic fabrics are washed or when they rub against each other. One study found that washing polyester and nylon clothes released 73,000 plastic fibers per garment, with polyester releasing nearly twice as many fibers as nylon. If we're wearing clothes made of these materials, we can breathe in a significant number of particles. Plus, some of those fibers are the same ones used in air filters, so they're designed to be really small and get deep into our lungs. While we're breathing in plastic fibers, we can also absorb microplastics through our skin. Researchers are still studying whether that's something we need to worry about, but it is possible. Some companies even claim that products like sunscreen or moisturizers can help protect our skin from absorbing plastic particles. So, how worried should we be about microplastics? Well, we're still learning. Research suggests that microplastics can cause inflammation and other problems in the body, but we don't yet know the long-term health effects. It's possible that eating a few particles won't hurt us, but it's also possible that it could be dangerous in the long run. We need more data to know for sure. What we do know is that microplastics are a growing problem. In 2019, researchers estimated that we produce about 275 million metric tons of plastic waste each year. By 2040, that number will likely double. While some of that plastic gets recycled, most of it doesn't. Less than 10% of plastic waste gets recycled globally. One way to reduce our exposure to microplastics is to avoid single-use plastics. These are plastics that are used once and then thrown away, like water bottles, coffee cups, and plastic bags. Using reusable items like cloth shopping bags and refillable water bottles can go a long way toward reducing the amount of plastic we use and therefore the number of particles we're exposed to. Another way we can reduce our exposure is to drink filtered water. Not all filters will remove microplastics, so it's important to look for one that does. As individuals, we can take steps to reduce our exposure to microplastics, but ultimately, we need to work together to stop plastic pollution before it starts. We need to make sure that plastic stays out of the ocean and the food we eat and the air we breathe. In 2019, only 18% of countries had a strategy for dealing with plastic pollution. We need more countries to come up with plans to keep plastic out of the environment. We also need to hold companies accountable for the plastic they produce and make sure they're doing their part to keep our planet clean. This content was made possible by a university and a grant from a national foundation. Their mission is to improve the human condition through grants in engineering education, innovation, and research. Through their support, this channel explores the amazing science that happens all around us and the brilliant minds behind it. To learn more about their programs, visit their website.